Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody is on board. You're welcome back to the second section of our workshop today. It's a pleasure having you with us again. Everybody, thank you for joining us. This is an event hosted by Richflood, a leading continental provider of environmental and social due diligence services for investment in Africa. The World Bank Environmental and Social Standard, ESS 5, recognizes that project-related land acquisition or restriction on land use may cause physical displacement. That is to say, relocation, loss of residential land or loss of shelter, or economic displacement, which involve also loss of land, assets, or access to assets, leading to loss of income sources or other means of livelihood, or both. Therefore, these impacts are referred to as involuntary resettlement. So the topic for our discussion today is Resettlement Action Plan, in short form, RAP, which entails the planning, implementation, and monitoring. And this workshop will help provide vital information and guidance on, number one, the planning and execution of involuntary resettlement, specifying the procedures that should be followed. Number two, this workshop also will stress on, as well as the actions to be taken to mitigate adverse effects and compensate losses in the effects of involuntary resettlement. So in today's section, in the morning section, we had a wonderful presentation by two presenters. One, Mr. Titus Dakop, and also Mr. Ojo Sunday, who made contribution to the topic and enlightened us on the benefits of effective RAP, and also made us to understand that unless properly managed, involuntary resettlement may result in long-term hardship and improvements for the affected communities and persons, as well as environmental damages and adverse social economic impacts in areas to which they have been displaced. So just in case you missed the morning section, you'll be wondering, how are you going to get to tap from the morning section? Don't worry. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. So this section, today's section, this afternoon section will last for just 1 hour. And let me quickly go over a few items so that you also can participate, so you know how to participate in today's event. So for instance, this workshop will be recorded. You take note that it is made available also on Richflood YouTube channel. Also, all participants are in listening only mode. Every participant, you are in a listening only mode. Once you click in and you are on board, the first thing for you to do is rename yourself. When you rename yourself, also add your organization, the name of your organization in brackets, so that we can properly identify you, know where you're coming from, also, and recognize you at the end of this section. Also, poll questions and observation, and also things that you maybe bothering you that you need clarification will be utilized during the course of the workshop, and we'll appreciate your participation. So let me also inform everyone that we have the opportunity to send in our questions at any time during the presentation, and our speakers will address them decisively. You can send it during the question and answer session or at the end of the presentation. So to send in your question, kindly utilize the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. When you check your screen, you will see at the bottom, you will see the chat box there, or at the top of your tablet. And kindly include your name and your location when you are writing, you are asking any question. Thank you so much. Thank everyone for being on board. I will go straight to the training for today and the workshop for today. I would like to introduce the first presenter for this section in the person of Mr. Emmanuel Chukwu. Mr. Emmanuel Chukwu is an environmental expert who has taken part in several projects on environmental assessment studies across Nigeria, including environmental and social impact assessments, environmental protection and rehabilitation programs, and other studies at Richflood International Limited. You're welcome, Mr. Emmanuel. Also, our second speaker for this afternoon section is Mr. Peter Gabwe. Mr. Peter Gabwe is a senior environmental analyst at Richflood, with his several years of professional experience in Resettlement and Action Plan, RAP, and Community Development Agreement, CDA, planning for various high-profile projects in Nigeria. He will be sharing with us vital information we need to know on the implementation stages of RAP as required by the World Bank. So it is a pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon, Mr. Peter. So let's go straight to the presentation of the first presentation of today. So I would like to hand over to Mr. Emmanuel for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, the moderator. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining this afternoon session of this workshop. I remember my humble self, Mr. Chukwu Emmanuel, as rightly introduced. I'll be taking you through this first session of this afternoon training. First of all, I want us to understand the reason for the Resettlement Action Plan, and I'll be very practical in my explanation. Now consider a scenario whereby there is a road construction within your vicinity, and in that regard, your building or your house maybe is closer to the road, and which serves to be demolished as a result of the road construction. Now, at that point in time, the government has asked you to vacate your house. And in that scenario, it could be that you have a farmland whereby there are some mineral resources that have been discovered in your farmland. And in that regard, a company is coming to set up a mining industry to be able to mine up the mineral resources that have been discovered in your farmland. And you are being asked to leave or vacate the farmland with immediate effect. Now, many of us Nigerians who've been victims to these circumstances and to these scenarios, which has adversely affected us. Now, in some scenarios, some companies, they come after maybe meet the chiefs or the traditional rulers of such communities. They'll hand them a particular amount of money and then tell them, please just go and settle those affected people. Now, that is the reason for the Resettlement Action Plan. Now, this is a plan that tends to checkmate all these activities in order to ensure full compensation of affected persons. Now, what are the objectives of this training? The planning and execution of involuntary resettlement, specifying the procedures that should be followed. Now, every planning and execution processes that is supposed to be put in place for people that are supposed to be involuntarily resettled, it needs to be specified, and these procedures need to be followed in accordance to this document, as well as the actions to be taken to mitigate adverse effects and compensate losses. Now, every action that is supposed to be taken to ensure that adverse effects are mitigated and losses are compensated accordingly need to be captured in the Resettlement Action Plan. Experience and research conducted by the World Health, by the World Bank Environmental and Social Framework indicates that physical and economic displacement, if unmitigated, may give rise to severe economic, social, and environmental risk. Production systems may be dismantled. People face impoverishment if their productive resources or other income sources are lost. People may be relocated to an environment where their productive skills are less applicable and the competitiveness for resources is greater. Community institutions and social networks may be weakened. Kin groups may be dispersed, and cultural identity, traditional authority, and the potential for mutual help may be diminished or lost. For these reasons, involuntary resettlement should be avoided. Where involuntary resettlement is unavoidable, it will be minimized and appropriate measures to mitigate adverse impacts on displaced persons, on host communities receiving displaced persons will be carefully planned and implemented. Now we are going to be looking at the introduction of what Resettlement Action Plan is all about. That is RAP. Now the Resettlement Action Plan was vividly and carefully coined by the World Bank to ensure that affected people as a result of developmental project or investment projects are compensated accordingly. We say that this means any of the recipient plans to be prepared and disclosed in accordance with the resettlement policy framework, which inter alia contains a consensus survey of displaced person and evaluation of lost assets. Now, before you are implementing what the World Bank is trying to put in place is to ensure that there is a survey, a census survey needs to be carried out of displaced person and evaluation of their assets. You know, when a construction project is going on, possibly a road construction that needs buildings and houses to be demolished. Now, there are people that owns bungalow, there are people that owns duplex, and there are people that owns mansion within that same vicinity. Now, you don't compensate the person that owns a bungalow the same way you compensate the person that owns a mansion. Now, you have to take a valuation of their assets so that you can be able to compensate these persons appropriately. That is the framework, that is the guideline at which World Bank is putting in place. Now, this also describes compensation and other resettlement assistance to be provided. Consultation to be conducted with displaced person about acceptable alternatives, institutional responsibilities for the implementation and procedures for grievance redress. Now, this document, which we call the Resettlement Action Plan, it tends to give you how this describes the compensation that needs to be given to people that that has been affected, and it also describes how consultation procedures need to be put in place, on also how alternative measures could be taken to ensure that these affected persons are compensated accordingly. Now, the document also contains timetable and budget for the implementation of such measures. Now, all the procedures that have been put in place, this document, the Resettlement Action Plan, also contains the systematic timetable on the budget for the implementation of the resettlement Action Plan. Now, under it, we are still looking at the Resettlement Action Plan. What is it all about? We can still say that the Resettlement Action Plan is a plan for securing livelihood of project-affected persons to be involuntary resettled. Now, there are people that are classified as involuntary resettled people. And these people, at their initial plan, they never wanted to go for resettlement. They never wanted to leave their place of habitation, the place they have been staying for years, the place they have been doing business. But because as a result of investment project or construction project that are going on, it has now forced them to leave their place of habitation or their place of doing business to now resettle them for another place. Now, this plan also tends to secure the livelihood of these people. Now, what are the objectives of RAP? Basically, this document has a particular objective to which it seeks to address. One of it is to avoid involuntary resettlement, or when unavoidable, minimize involuntary resettlement by exploring project design alternatives. Now, what this document is all about is trying to ensure that if there are other alternatives to which people should not be resettled involuntarily, those alternatives should be visited. Those alternatives should be employed to ensure that people are not resettled involuntarily. That is one of the objectives of the Resettlement Action Plan. It also seeks to avoid forced eviction. Now, this document ensures that people are not forcibly evicted from their place of habitation, from their place of settlement. This document tends to ensure that people are voluntarily resettled, because there is a systematic approach to which you must follow and apply to ensure that people are resettled appropriately. The document also tends to seek how to mitigate unavoidable adverse and social economic impact from land acquisition or restriction on land use. Now, this document also tries to ensure that it tries to avoid adverse social and economic impacts. Now, people that are supposed to be resettled, these people they stand the chances of loss of business, loss of finance, and also their social life may be affected. Now, when you are planning resettlement of such persons, all these factors need to be taken into consideration. Now, assisting displaced persons in their effort to improve or at least restore their livelihood and living standard in real terms, or pre-displacement levels, or to levels prevailing prior to the beginning of project implementation, whichever that is higher. Another objectives of the Resettlement Action Plan is to improve living condition of poor or vulnerable persons who are physically displaced through provision of adequate housing, access to services and facilities, and security of tenure. Now, in some cases, when the Resettlement Action Plan, what it seeks to address is to ensure that there is an improvement of the living condition of the resettled people. For instance, take a simple example. I have a thatch house or a mud house within an area whereby the government want to construct a road. Now, at that point in time, maybe I possibly may not have any electricity and no borehole in my apartment at that point in time. Now, if there is going to be a resettlement action plan on my regard, what this plan will tend to seek is to ensure that there is an improvement in my living. Possibly when I'm being resettled, a block house should be built for me. and an electricity supply should be made available for me, and also water availability should be made, available for me. Now, this resettlement action plan tends to address these issues and to improve the livelihood and living conditions of the affected person that needs to be resettled. It also seeks to conceive and execute resettlement activities as sustainable development programs, providing sufficient investment resources to enable displaced persons to benefit directly from the project as the nature of the project may warrant. Now, the Resettlement Action Plan also seeks to ensure that, for instance, when I'm being evicted from my land as a result of a mining company that is to be situated under my farmland, now provisions are made for employment for me, possibly if not for me, at least for my children or for my family. Now you see that with all these strategies put in place, this is a systematic approach put forward by the World Bank to ensure that the living condition of resettled people is adequately catered for. Now, also another objective of the Resettlement Action Plan is seeks to ensure that resettlement activities are planned and implemented with appropriate disclosure of information, meaningful consultation, and the informed participation of those affected persons. Now, this plan also ensures that all the activities of the Resettlement Action Plan is adequately planned, and according to this document, it should be implemented accordingly. That is the objectives of the Resettlement Action Plan. Now, we have various types of resettlement sites which should be taken into consideration when preparing the Resettlement Action Plan. Remember that this is a document that needs to be followed. Now, one of it is location. Now, what are the affected areas or issues when it comes to location? Household in project areas, household in project areas. Now you have to consider the household people in this project area. Now, for an area whereby there is a construction of houses, a construction of roads, now you have to consider the household people living in that area. Also the facility, now the infrastructure, the new place you are resettling these persons, the facility they had before, the roads, the schools, the healthcare centers, are they taken into consideration when you are resettling the people that have been affected? These are questions that the Resettlement Action Plan seeks to answer. And also, one of the other factors that most of the implementation personnel or parties, when it comes to implementing this policy, they don't consider this number, which is the environmental and social considerations. Now, one is the natural environment, the floras, the fauna, and the biodiversity. Now, when you are resettling people, the trees that they used to have in their vicinity, are you going to plant these trees for them? Now, all the biodiversities that were found within their vicinity, when you are resettling these people, all these are factors that need to be taken into consideration, and also the social environment, the local community, the women, the children, the men, and all these needs to be taken into consideration. Now, the pollution, the noise, the vibration, water, and solid waste. All these are factors that need to be taken into consideration when you are preparing the Resettlement Action Plan. Now, what are the requirements of RAP? One is the general requirement, which is the eligibility classification. We have to classify people according to how they are affected. Now, the definition according to World Bank states that affected persons may be classified as persons who have formal legal right to land or asset. We've seen scenarios whereby you go to communities and you are planning a resettlement action plan, you see people, the entitlement, the chiefs, the elders, they are coming to claim ownership to a particular land. That is to ensure that they are compensated. Now, they are not the rightful owners. Now, they are not regarded as the affected persons. But when you carry out your resettlement action plan properly, you will be able to identify the affected persons, people that have the legal right to the land and the assets that are affected, and people who do not have formal legal rights to land or assets, but have a claim to land or asset that is recognized or recognizable under national law. Now, there are people, for instance, I own a farmland, and that land was leased to me by another person. I planted, and suddenly a developmental project is coming on that land. Now, two things are involved. The crops will be affected and the land will be taken away. Now, I need to be compensated on my crops, and the owner of the land needs to be compensated. Now, these people, the person that owns the crop is recognized as person that has a claim on that land, and people who no recognizable legal rights or claim to the land or assets they occupy or use. Now, these are people that are classified as people that are affected. Now, other requirement is the project design. The resettlement action plans, the borrower will demonstrate that involuntary land acquisition or restrictions on land use are limited to direct project requirements for clearly specified project purposes within a clearly specified period of time. Now, we have lots of factors that need to be taken into consideration when you are preparing the resettlement action plan. Now, these are the project design, the planning and implementation, the grievance redress, the grievance mechanism, and lots of other factors that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, when we talk about the resettlement plan, introduction, minimizing resettlement, census and socioeconomic surveys, which the speaker in the morning has dealt exponentially on this resettlement plan. Now, who are regarded as the potential impacts? The project components or activities that give rise to displacement, explaining why the selected land must be acquired for use within the time frame of project. Now, I'll be rounding off this presentation because of our time, so that the next person can be able to have an ample time to make his contribution to this topic. And this will take me to my conclusion on this presentation. We say that resettlement plans include measures to address physical and or economic displacement, depending on the nature of the impact expected from a project. Projects may use alternative nomenclature depending on the scope of the resettlement plan. For example, where a project involves only economic displacement, the resettlement plan may be called a livelihood plan, or where restrictions on access to legally designed parks and protected areas are involved, the plan may take the form of a process framework. So when you have a resettlement action plan that seeks to address demands on economic displacement, such a plan is regarded as a livelihood plan. And when it seeks to address people that are legally designed maybe to have access to a particular environment based on restrictions, such a plan is regarded as a process framework. So I'll be handing over back to the moderator to take it over from here. Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you everyone. Thank you so much for Mr. Emmanuel. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Really appreciate you. That presentation was noteworthy and illuminating. So we'll go over straight to the second presentation by Mr. Peter. The stage is yours, sir. You can go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, moderator. I want to welcome everyone to the last phase of today's workshop on Resettlement Action Plan. I hope this contribution will meet your expectation, as I will highlight on the wonderful contributions of the previous presenters so far. The IFC defines resettlement as the disruption and displacement of persons or community as a result of project-related land acquisitions and restriction on land use. A resettlement can be classified as either voluntary or involuntary, and it may be either physical or economical. A resettlement is a voluntary when the resettled household have the choice to move. When the voluntary nature of resettlement cannot be confirmed, resettlement should be treated as involuntary. In terms of best practice, project owners are encouraged to acquire land rights through negotiated resettlements wherever possible, even if they have the legal means to gain access to the land without the sellers or occupiers' consent. An example, for example, a household may be deprived for developmental purpose, and at the same time also a community may be deprived access to water source as a result of the projects. So the impacts may be negative on the livelihood of the people living in the area. So economic displacement can be defined as the loss of assets or access to assets that leads to loss of income sources, and other means of livelihood. It can be permanent or temporary. For example, an affected person may lose temporary access to a portion of their field, probably as a result of the construction of a road construction projects. So all these are to be noted, and there are essential components of RAP. And these essential components of RAP are, number one, the identification of the project impact and affected population. This is very important because all of our discussion concerning RAP is centered on project affected persons. So standards are, there are standards approach in order to identify these persons, and this may affected persons, and register them according to their locations, and also having an inventory and categorization of the project affected persons and assets to be affected. It's also very important also as a way of trying to identify these project affected persons to a socio-economic assessments of this project affected persons. And finally, it's also important to do some analysis of surveys and studies to establish the compensation parameters to design mechanisms and a sustainable development initiative. So all these are very important, and it's still also among the list of essential the legal framework. The frameworks are all relevant local laws apply resettlements. Number one, by trying to identify local or World Bank group policies and describe project-specific mechanisms to address the conflicts. And also for legal framework, the method of valuation used for affected structures, lands, trees, and other assets. There is also the compensation framework where valuation of assets of the affected persons are implemented and conducted through a general principles adopted by the World Bank policy. And it's worthy to note that project affected persons that lost income and assets would include full replacement value for loss of reproductive trees based on life of species, or probably the maturity of the particular species and the productive value of it. And also to be considered is the loss of income and business. It is also as well, it's good to also value the business at their full replacement cost. A detailed budget is very intense, also under the component, finally under the essential component of RAP. A detailed budget is important because it captures the inventory of all affected assets, provides the basis for estimating the compensation and assistance costs. What are the methodology of resettlements? Methodology of resettlements, it is very important to evaluate, the project impacts. It entails the identification of positive and negative impacts. The negative impact would be a result of the size of the land take as a result of the project, or it may be as a result of displacement of economic trees, crops, or fence, and as well as other properties. And as we try to see the environmental impact, it is also very important also to consider the social impact as a result of these resettlement activities. So it is advised that where impacts can be avoided, impacts should be avoided as much as possible. So consultations should be carried out by stakeholders, with stakeholders, ensure the mitigation measures, ensure that appropriate measures are provided. Census of affected persons is required to consult, to have various consultation, one-on-one engagements with project affected persons. Socioeconomic aspect is also very important because it involves details of the characteristics of these project affected persons, and this may have to do with a detailed document showing their sex, their age, their religion, their marital status, their highest educational qualification, their occupation, their household size. And also it's important to have some focus group discussion and have some key informal interview, physical observation. So it's good in the resettlement criteria, and this resettlement criteria should include the legal framework where you show eligibility, the valuation, and then the compensation for losses. And this should it should be noted that the project affected persons, irrespective of their status or whether they have the former title, legal right or not, even if they are squatters or otherwise encroaching illegally on the land, are eligible for some kind of assistance if they occupy the project area before the cutoff dates. Resettlement measures are to be put in place. Valuation of losses are also to be captured on the World Bank policy of 4.12. on involuntary settlement states that lost income and assets will be valued at their full replacement cost, such that the project affected persons should not experience any net loss. Cost estimates and budgets are also very important to be captured as well. And for eligibility criteria of the project affected persons, those who have legal rights of land, are probably those that have the customary rights and the traditional rights that are recognized under the laws of the country. Or it may be those who do not have the formal rights to the land at the time the census began, but have a claim to such land or assets and become recognized during this survey, as well as those who have no recognizable legal rights and claim to the land that they are occupying. And we need to look at proofs of eligibility, the proofs of eligibility, various forms of evidence to prove eligibility of this project affected person. And some of this proof might be in the form of a formal legal rights, documented in the form of a land title registration, or probably certificates, or it may be in the form of a tenancy agreements, rental receipts, building and planning permits. It may also be in the form of business operating licenses and utility bills, among others. And now this takes us to one of the most important aspects of the Resettlement Action Plan, and that is about the compensation. The following principles should be followed. The following principles should be followed for payment of compensation for lost assets. And compensation should be paid prior to acquisition or displacement. And compensation for structures should include the full cost of materials and labor required for reconstructing a building, for instance, if it is a building or similar surface and standing. And compensation, compensating all the project affected persons adequately for properties and income lost. So it's important for us to know that under the World Bank policy, cash compensation is only appropriate when there is an active market in the land or housing and where such assets are actually available for purchase. Procedures of delivering compensation. The procedures should include full payment of compensation carried out before possession of acquired sites. That is very important. And necessary documents of payment to affected persons should be presented to local land asset valuation committee from probably the local government or other independent witness of the affected persons and leaders of the community. And also as a way of properly delivering the compensation, it is important and copies given to affected persons. The process of resettlement action plan cannot be without a grievance issue. So the resettlement action package has a way of addressing grievances, and part of this mechanism is through consultation. And the consultation process during execution of the project may generate, for instance, you may have to consider the environmental and social concern as a result of the relocation of project affected persons. And all this can be achieved through consultation. And this will create some grievances and that must be addressed. So definitely some of these project affected persons may complain concerning some negative impacts on their environment. Also may complain about some social impact, negative social impacts on their environment. So typical complaint may arise as a result of probably demolition of project affected persons' structure, or disruption of business activities resulting in the loss of income, disagreements on compensation values, and delay in receiving disturbance allowance due to discrepancies. So there are mechanisms of addressing these grievances, and it starts with receiving and registering a complaint, and then thereafter the screening and assessing the complaint. In the process of the screening, you're trying to see if the complaint is tied to the land, if the complaint is tied to their means of livelihood. So there is need for you to screen all of their complaints, and then there is need for you to also formulate a response, select a resolution approach, and then that is implementing the approach, announcing the results openly for the sake of transparency, and tracking and evaluating the results, learning from the experience and communicating back to all parties involved, preparing a timely report to management on the nature and the resolution of these grievances. It's important for us to know that there is no ideal model or one-size-fits-all approach for grievance resolution. However, the best solution to grievances are generally achieved through localized mechanisms that takes into account specific issues along their cultural context, specific issues along their local custom, and then the specific issues as a result of the condition of the project in question. And of course, in line with best practice for social impact assessment and procedure, and as a result of a procedure in Nigeria and the World Bank, public consultation is a major driver of this social safeguard assignments. The public consultation and participation are essential because they avoid the potential project affected persons the opportunity to contribute to both the design and implementation of the project activities, and reduce the likelihood of conflicts between and among the project affected persons and the participating states. And for your consultation process, it is important for you to raise awareness. Sometimes the project affected persons may raise some awareness. There will be a need to do some analysis on the issue and propose a solution, and thereafter involve in the planning and then the development. So the stakeholders should be carried along each of these stages of consultation. And I'll end this discussion by giving some good practices of resettlement. Community managed resettlement. Community managed resettlement is a very good practice. Is one of the good practice of resettlement around the world. That does not mean mere community participation, but allow community to control and the ownership of resettlement program. The more the resettlement program is community and collectively centered, the greater the chance of it succeeding. Public hearing and review widely use the strategy in certain countries to ensure people participate in decision-making process. The public hearing provides a scope for open discussion on various institutional, social, and environmental aspects of any developmental projects. The public hearing is transparent. Independent reviews are most effective when they are conducted by organizations or people who enjoy a relatively high credibility from the stakeholders, and when the methodology of the review is participatory and transparent. The social impact assessments. This assessment is the assessment of the project, assessing the project social aspect, social view of the project, bringing estimation of the effects of the project on agreed persons. And it is imperative that there should be a detailed assessment of a socio-economic condition of the people who may be negatively affected. Again, the adoption of a comprehensive plan to mitigate this impact and analyzing extent of displacement and loss of livelihood is an important indicator of successful resettlement and rehabilitation program. And finally, defining the eligibility of benefits of resettlement. As part of the good practices of resettlement, it's good to develop a program for negatively affected persons. The inclusion of this eligibility criteria has potential to benefit the actual displaced person. It is available, it is able to address the widespread impacts of the diverse aspects of the developmental projects, upstream and downstream, along with the host community. So the negatively affected and the negatively affected persons. The World Bank has defined the critical criteria over which the displaced persons may be identified and entitled for actual benefits. And for a conclusion, I would want to say that a comprehensive resettlement action plan is key to successful planning, implementation, and management of project affected persons. And we want to believe that with this contribution so far, that I will be able to reach each and every one of us. At this very point in time, I want to hand over to the moderator to take it from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peter, for that delightful presentation. We'll go straight to the questions and responding to our questions. We received a couple of questions from participants during the course of our presentation. So we'll go straight to answering some of the questions. We may not be able to take every question, but the first question is directed to Mr. Emmanuel. The question says, what is the role of government in carrying out the RAP? So what is the role of government in carrying out RAP? Over to you, Mr. Emmanuel.
Okay, thank you very much, the moderator. Thank you very much, the person that sent in the question. Now, the government basically serves as the regulator in the implementation of the Resettlement Action Plan. Now, when the company has come with the plan, the government ensures that they regulate and ensures full implementation of all the clauses and items that have been identified in this plan, and appropriate compensations are meted to the affected persons according to the plan. So the government basically acts as a regulatory body in the implementation of the Resettlement Action Plan. I want to believe that answers your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel. The second question is coming from Mr. Ibrahim Mukhtar Toure from Guinea-Conakry. He's working from BT Pro, South Africa. So his question is to Mr. Peter, is there any formula for calculating the land in the process of RAP? Over to you, Mr. Peter.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. For the calculation, I would advise that you leave it to the estate surveyor and valuer. They have the formulas for this very calculation, and beside that, the local content has prescribed values attached to each of these calculations. For instance, if you're talking about the economic trees, each of these economic trees have their own values, and then the values also depends on the current market value, the current market value. So it's better you allow the an estate surveyor and the valuer do the calculation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peter, for that response to the question. I'm not sure we'll have much time for us to be able to continue, but the other questions that have been asked, please, we're going to be responding to you in the chat box. We're going to be responding to you on that. And also, we'd like to make a statement that the RAP we're talking today, we're discussing, is one of the environmental services. One of it that is being conducted at Richflood International. So maybe you're interested even for the RAP and all other services, you can visit our website, which is www.richflood.com. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. Thank you, Mr. Peter, for that time with us. So in case you missed any of these sections, please kindly go to our YouTube page for where the recording of this workshop has been done. Thank you so much. Now, because of our time, we'll not be able to take all the questions. So if you have any further questions, you can also forward them to info@richflood.com. Info is info @richflood.com. We appreciate all our contributors in this section. I know you took out of your schedule, your tight schedule, for you to be able to give enlighten us, and we really appreciate, and also we're looking forward to having you again and again. It was actually an eye-opener. Thank you so much. We want to thank everyone for attending and for your contribution also in today's workshop. Everybody, we thank you. We hope also to see you. Kindly also remember that 23rd of September 2020, that is next month, we're having our next edition for the monthly workshop, and we'll be having key players in the industry who will be discussing on a new topic we're going to be introducing, which is remediation management, incorporating sustainability consideration into remediation projects. So you can, the registration link also for the workshop is in the chat box, and those that have not gotten it, will send it to you. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being part of this Epoch workshop meeting, and we believe that next workshop you'll be part of us. Finally, before we draw the curtain for today, we would like to have a group photograph. Everyone would like to have a group photograph. So we'd like you to switch on your video. Kindly switch on your video so that we will be seeing you. Want to see you. We know you're awesome. Want to see you. Thank you. Yes. Want to see you so that we will have it in our record that we had a lot of people. Yes, that's Abdul Karim Oba. Abdul Karim. Yes, that's Mr. Ibrahim. Yeah, awesome. You're coming from Guinea Conakry or something. Yes, that's good. I hope you hear English. That's good. Thank you. That is Mr. Emmanuel. Thank you so much. We can see other people. We can see, yes, we can see you. I can see Mr. Isaac. We can see you. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. We can see. So, okay. So we're having the picture right now. We're having the group photograph right now. So yes, that's good. Yes, that's good. That's good. Thank you so much. Thank you once again for joining us. We are so glad. We are so glad. And we'll also be glad that you will be joining us next time by 23rd. Just mark it. You can mark the dates in your Google Calendar or in your calendar. Just mark the date 23rd. Remember, just get a little data and then be part of the workshop. It is never tiring for you to learn, and learning will never end. So keep on learning, and as you keep on learning, you become better.